What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And of course, the Cavs are getting ready for another short road trip this time after their win against the Detroit Pistons, where they took away a 110-91 win. And people might be asking, why did I lead with the little change of scenery? That's why Chris Fedor is not here. But today I am joined by Jimmy Watkins, columnist, cleveland.com. You know him, you love him. And Jimmy, this was a game that was very, as you described it before we got on the call, sleepy to begin the first half. And it was a defensive-minded game for both teams. Obviously, the Cavs going up against their former coach, Jimmy Bickerstaff, an old-school-minded coach who loves the defensive end. The Cavs trying to reinvigorate their defensive identity that they have lost over the last week or so, especially over their 3-game losing skid. Now, they are no longer on a losing streak, and they have gotten to a point where they feel like they have improved their defense. This has been an inconsistent portion of the Cavs game. What did you take away from their defensive output tonight against the Detroit Pistons, especially when you talk about the Pistons only having 3 real scoring options?
Yeah, they kind of got their swagger back on that end of the floor. I thought it was, for a second there, I thought the MAC tournament had come early to Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse. Just not a lot of shots going through the net. A great tribute to JB Bickerstaff, right? To win a rock fight against JB Bickerstaff's Detroit Pistons team. I think some of this was JB's doing as we watched the Cavs with more talent and experience, but we watched them drag other good offenses into how many rock fights last season and beyond. For those of you listening who watched the entire JB era, you watched JB Bickerstaff drag a lot of teams with equal or even better talent into these kinds of games and win them because he had the scheme and the players to do it. The Cavs, I want to get behind them. I want to get behind the Cavs and say, yes, you have fixed your defense. It's all good again. You're back. At the same time, I do think that a lot of those things are true. They were better at keeping the Pistons away from the rim, as Kenny Atkinson emphasized before and after the game. I thought they directed 3-point looks to the right shooters. I also just think that the Pistons are easier to guard. Cade Cunningham has been unbelievable this season, and it should be noted that Cade Cunningham is capable of doing the Luka Doncic thing of like picking apart an entire defense essentially by himself. That's what he's been doing on the Pistons' best night, especially since Jaden Ivey, their number two creator on the Pistons, has been out. Cade Cunningham is capable of doing that, and it's a credit to the Cavs, and it's a credit to Max Strus, who had the lion's share of defensive assignment against Cade. Jaylon Tyson had some interesting moments against Cade as well in this game. It's a credit to Max Strus' tenacity that he was able to frustrate Cade. But I also I listened to JB Bickerstaff's press conference on the way home. Cade also missed some easy shots. He also was seeing a lot of bodies on drives, both because, like I said, Pistons have some guys you can help off of, and Jared Allen and Evan Mobley never looking far from the rim, right? So 2 things can be true. I think that's going to be the theme of the night from the way I'm looking at this game. 2 things can be true. The Cavs are definitely looked much more focused on the defensive end, and that is important going forward, regardless of who they're playing. But also the Detroit Pistons are not the best offense that you're going to see come into Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse Arena. So this game was sort of conducive to a defensive rebound. But Max Strus said it after the game. It didn't matter who they were playing tonight. They were gonna bring it defensively. I mostly agree with that because they did look a lot more engaged and fresh, right? That's been another talking point of the last week or so. They played 5 games in 7 days. 1 day off goes a long way in the NBA.
And obviously, Jimmy, as you mentioned, the assignment mostly went to Max Strus. Kenny Atkinson mentioned before the game that will be a familiar case for Max Strus when it comes to defending the opposing team's best player each game, especially with Caris LeVert. Karis LeVert, Isaac Okoro, and Dean Wade all being out, all three defensive stoppers at the point of attack for the Cavs. They're going to have to lean on Max Strus, and tonight was one of those nights where Max showcased that, as we have remembered from his matchups and duels with guys like Jason Tatum over the years, and especially last season in the playoffs, especially with Dean Wade being out then. Cade Cunningham was just 9 of 26 from the floor. I think they said that their goal was to make Cade take 30 shots in the game. They got very close to that. Obviously, he still got 22 points, but they also held him to 7 assists. And obviously, that when you talk about the creativity that he has, and I would have wanted to see them force him into more turnovers. But when you talk about point of attack defense being their focal point for tonight, that's a little bit more difficult. But I do think, and Jimmy, you kind of were alluding to this in the locker room about the storyline between the JB Bickerstaff-led Pistons or the JB Bickerstaff-led whoever team in the Cavaliers, especially after what happened and transpired after the Eastern Conference semifinals last year and how JB Bickerstaff was let go. Sure, a lot of different people can say, like, there's no, like, there's nothing to be heard or to be seen in those contests rather than just the basketball games itself. I don't believe that to be true, Jimmy, and I don't know if you believe that to be true either, because Max Strus definitely had a fire lit under him tonight. Obviously, he plays with a different level of energy, but we knew that coming in, that he had a little bit of some, let's say, unresolved feelings towards J.B. Bickerstaff and how the offense was ran last year, how he didn't get the amount of shots that he may have wanted, all these different things. And the other player that I talked to after the game individually that said that a celebration that he had during the game was directed towards J.B. Bickerstaff and his bench was Ty Jerome, who had his little finger gun celebration directed towards the bench after not getting to play only just 2 games last year with the Cleveland Cavaliers due to an ankle injury. So, Jimmy, for me to ask you this, what do you think about this entire debacle? The truth behind it? Is it coach speak? Is it players not really wanting to give more bulletin board material? Or what do you think it is? Because Jay Bickerstaff said it before the games, happiness doesn't get clicks.
Okay, so I think this is another 2 things can be true situation. This might be like 5 things can be true, actually. So I'll try to land this plane. I'll try to land this plane gracefully once I take off. So I don't believe what you said, Ethan. I don't believe that what players say when it's nothing. It's just think about it. Think about people. Think about human nature. Oh, we're playing against the coach who led us for 4 years, and then we kind of told him. Then we got tired of his style of basketball. And so the front office told him, hey, we need to reimagine our offense a little bit. So take that from either side. You don't think the Cavs are trying to prove something with these matchups? A little bit of that? You don't think so? I find that hard to believe. You don't think JB Bickerstaff walks into the building, a little extra pep in his step, getting ready to play the Cavs? You don't think, we won't know because they lost. You don't think, like, I think, and I was thinking of this during the game, I think the Pistons players would have been more willing to talk about it than JB would. But, like, you don't think there would have been an extra little celebration in the Pistons locker room if they beat the Cavs tonight? Ethan, you have been in that locker room this year more than I have. It was a pretty darn happy locker room. A lot of energy in the Cavs locker room tonight. Yeah? They were watching.
That might be the happiest I've seen them after, like, obviously they were watching the Boston Celtics game, and like we were walking into the locker room and we could hear the cheers from outside. And this was like after we had talked to Kenny Atkinson. Like, this is like at least 15, 20 minutes after the game had concluded. But continue, Jimmy. I'm sorry.
A lot of whooping, a lot of hollering, a lot of Georges Niang talking. Not saying anything like in particular about JB, but just like that guy was in a good mood. That guy was in a good mood after beating the Pistons, who, other than JB Bickerstaff and the assistants he took over, and Trajan Langdon, obviously, like, I guess it's a divisional rivalry and it's a city that's close to Cleveland, like not a ton of historic rivalry going on there. So I don't buy that. I do think that particularly like the way it ended, where the Cavs get another round in the playoffs, kind of lose to the Celtics in large part because of injuries. Like that's a tough way to end that relationship. I also think that over time, you kind of, okay, it's as hot as it feels in the moment. Now the Cavs are doing great. Now JB Bickerstaff's doing great. When they see each other, they're going to compete harder. Max Strus and others might have a little something to say about the way JB used to coach them. But like, even this is where I think that I asked Max Strus about, or I asked a lot of guys in the locker room tonight. I'm going to write this for the morning about all the Bickerstaff DNA that they see in the Pistons. And I thought Max's answer from beginning to end was perfect. Encapsulation of why JB Bickerstaff's a good coach and why some of the veterans in this locker room didn't follow him to his full extent by the end. Why he sort of lost some staying power. So the first thing Max did was smile and kind of chuckle. We can all speculate as to what the first thought into Max's mind. Maybe something about the offense. Maybe something about the fact that JB Bickerstaff DNA sometimes leads to 91-point performances against really good defenses. I'm just speculating based on what we know about Max's attitude last year in the playoffs, based on what we know about how why JB Bickerstaff was let go, the differences between him and Kenny as philosophical coaches, all that. But then he went into something of a coach speaky, player speaky answer about, they're always going to play hard, this and that, they play good defensively, they're playing good basketball. And he ended up settling on, he gets them to play really hard, and that's half the battle in the NBA. And I think this is where Max sells JB Bickerstaff a little short, because it is really hard. I asked Kenny about this before the game, and he said this basically verbatim. It's really hard to get young teams to buy in on the defensive end in this league. It's really hard to get veterans to come play for younger teams and stay in their roles. JB Bickerstaff is accomplishing both of those things right now. The Pistons entry tonight, I think, were like 11th or 12th or 13th in defense. I looked it up the other day. And they're a 500 team or thereabouts. They have more wins. It's January, Ethan. They have more wins this year than they have had over each of the last, I think it's 4 seasons in a full season.
2020, 2021, I believe. Yep.
Yeah. That's crazy. And JB deserves a ton of credit for that. He is really good at digging teams out of the bottom of the NBA. I think that's really hard. And I think that Max just sort of remember what Max Strus said. He gets teams to play hard. That's half the battle in the NBA. I don't think Max Strus gives that a ton of due to the coach, because Max Strus is always playing on 1,000. Okay. Max Strus came from Heat culture. He came from Pat Riley, came from Eric Spoelstra. He came from a place where they don't let you play without doing a conditioning test. Okay. So Max Strus's experience in the NBA has been a little bit different than a lot of other people. And so to Max Strus, okay, so you get us to play hard. Cool. Max Strus will play hard for a brick wall. If there's a brick wall on the sideline, Max Strus is going to give his all for it because he's just an extremely high-strung competitor. That's just who he is. But yeah, it's two things can be true. Again, there's some hurt feelings on JB's side. There's a little bit of feeling vindicated on the Cavs side. But they're also doing their own thing now. And it's okay for the Cavs to now say, good for JB, look at him instilling another culture over there. It's another thing for JB to look at the Cavs and say, good for them. I got a lot of love for those guys in those locker rooms. It's a little slanted, right? Because JB is probably still looking over here and saying, Well, what if I would have gotten another season? Like, what if this leap was always coming if you're JB Bickerstaff, right? What if I had gotten the healthier, I know the Cavs are dealing with injuries now, but the healthier version of the core four? All of these what ifs that could be playing in your mind,
what
right?
If you had Ty Jerome for the entire
What if you had,
season?
Ty Jerome finger guns? Why are you shooting me, Ty Jerome? Shoot your ankle. Come on, man. Like, that's not my fault if I'm JB Bickerstaff. Right. But the point is there's a lot going on here. A lot of things to be connected. And I think I understand where everybody is coming from basically every perspective on this.
And Jimmy, I think when we have this conversation, we got to go back to how this ended, right? The story that came out almost as soon as the season ended about how JB Bickerstaff was losing the locker room of veteran players, right? It's not like there were just like murmurs. It was like clear cut that there were people in the locker room, and Max Strus said it at the end of last season, we have enough in this locker room to win. And that has been the feeling, and that is what has been said throughout this entire season. Kenny Atkinson has said it the last couple of games, right? And we talk about all of these different narratives, and then somebody asked J.B. Bickerstaff in his pregame about, do you feel like you have to measure how you keep veteran players happy versus young players happy in his pregame, talking about the Detroit Pistons. And I'll probably have to put J.B. Bickerstaff's voice in here, even though it'll be a lower audio. But Jimmy, this is what he said in that interview.
Because we're together so much, and we've been places, where it got miserable, we don't allow that to seep in. We don't allow bitching and complaining. We don't allow negativity. So whether you're young, old, veteran, however many, whatever, you show up and you got to bring a positive attitude and contribute something, positive to the group, and then everybody can enjoy that.
And I was like, okay, so you just dropped the B word in an official press conference, and you're telling us that there's nothing that you're thinking about outside of your own team right here in this conversation, after like three Cavs beat reporters that you had to deal with at least for the last 3 to 4 years had commented before this person had gotten this question in. So I think it's a lot of interesting context to go into this. But I don't want to get caught up in this conversation, as I feel like we've covered that in the last 15 minutes.
Can I just say real quick, yep, though? It's all about entry point. Where's this team at? The Detroit Pistons, they should behave like model citizens in that locker room for JB Bickerstaff. You guys remember what it was like last year when we were winning 3 games a month? Like, of course it's all peace and harmony over there. That's how it was in the beginning when JB got the Cavs up and running. The play-in year, first year with Donovan, it was all great. It seems like there's a connotation of disrespect that comes with being the culture builder, foundation setter, like archetype of coach that JB Bickerstaff has been labeled as now, which is getting these young teams to buy in, creating an identity of physicality and defense and all that stuff. It is all old school stuff. I still think it's really hard, and I think it's the Detroit Pistons have been transformed in large part by JB Bickerstaff. And another thing that Kenny mentioned, Cade Cunningham having the best season of his career, in part because they brought in some veterans who can space and shoot. Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr., that helps for sure. But JB deserves credit for that stuff too. He's the same guy, and it's working in Detroit. It's just that the Cavs, we talked about this a lot during the summer. The reality of coaching the Cavs shifted beneath JB's feet while he was here with the Mitchell trade. And maybe the exciting part for him now is what did you learn from that experience? What's it going to look like when the Pistons are ready to win? And I believe Cade can be a number one guy on a really good team. What's it going to look like when the Pistons are ready to win 48, 50 games? That's the next interesting question.
I would want to finish this up, this conversation with 2 things. First, we talked about Max Strus, and I want to give a little bit of insight from what our subtext gets, and this is what Chris texted out before the game. He said, Max Strus is yet to play against Detroit this season because this was the second time that they had matched up in the regular season, and they had played in the preseason too. He said preseason, regular season, road, home, not sure what it will lead to, but you can bet he will play hard tonight with a little extra fuel. Just saying. And like, if you're trying to get like tipped off about something, that's where you go. Subtext, you subscribe, 14 days free, and then you can continue to get our insight, especially with Chris Fedor, who's probably, if not the most tapped in Cavs beat reporter when it comes to this team. But the other thing that Jimmy's mentioning, and I want to clean this up from what I said earlier, the Pistons were a punchline last year. They finished with a league worst 14-68 record that included an unfathomable 28-game losing streak. Fast forward to this year, they already matched their highest win total, 23 wins, since 2021-2022. The last time they won more than 23 games in a season, 2018-2019. Like, that's insane to think about the trajectory that they're already on. And I have to check this now because the standings, as we know, update throughout every week and every day, and because of games and schedules and all this other stuff. But coming into the game, they were the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference. And as much as J.B. Bickerstaff, and I talked to Pistons reporters before the game about this because I was thinking about writing about it, about what the goal was for this team. And they keep continuing to say rebuilding and leveling up on every single thing that they have going on. Like, they're not a finished product. Obviously, Jimmy mentioned it. Jaden Ivey's out. Cade Cunningham is still in his infancy of his career and is already playing to this caliber. So J.B. Bickerstaff is building. This is year one. And as we said when Donovan Mitchell got to the Cavs, it is year one of the J.B. Bickerstaff experience in Detroit. So all that being said, I want to get back to the game tonight because as Jimmy mentioned, and I agree with you, I think J.B. Bickerstaff from the other side kind of reinvigorated the defense and the foundation that he had set within the Cavs. But also when you talk about the players that stepped up tonight, those are the guys that J.B. Bickerstaff helped mold and helped grow, especially even on the offensive end. Darius Garland, again, was great. 8 of 19, 22 points. I believe he was able to take over the second half. He had 12 of his points in that frame. He was 2 of 4 from 3 in the second half. And I just wanted to ask you, Jimmy, because, and this is another storyline from tonight and something that I wrote about for the website yesterday when this podcast airs. Kenny Atkinson continues to compare Darius Garland to Stephen Curry. Continues to do it. He's done it since they first matched up. He did it again tonight, even though they didn't play Stephen Curry. He's talking about the play style, all of these different things. And what I wrote about and what I'm curious to ask you, Jimmy, is do you feel like, because me and Chris already had this conversation, do you feel like Darius Garland could be on the trajectory to have the torch passed down to him by Steph? Not saying that he's going to be the next Steph Curry, but that his play style, his relatability, his size is similar to something that the Cavs could rely on when it comes to what Steph was able to do for the Warriors.
Okay, 2 quick things. Well, 1 quick thing and then I'll answer. I just want 2018-19, the last time the Pistons won more than 23 games. I believe Ethan was a college student then. I was an intern at various places in Cleveland. And none of the Cavs core 4 were in the NBA. We're in Cleveland. I believe Jared Allen was around, and Don was in Utah. Evan Mobley and Darius Garland were. I think Darius might have been at Vanderbilt that year. Evan Mobley is still in high school at this time. Okay, just wrap your. It speaks to both how incompetent the Pistons have been and how impressive this turnaround is for JB. Just throwing that out there as an aside. To the Darius Steph comparison. So I think that when Kenny makes these comparisons, he's comparing, first of all, he's giving, I'm sure he's saying this to Darius all the time, and he's giving something, Darius, a model to aspire to, and there's no better model for an undersized guard than Steph Curry. He's the best one ever, bar none. But I think he's comparing more like aesthetics than impact on the game, at least right now. mean, Steph wasn't Steph until it took Steph a while to get to be capital S Steph in this league. And it's kind of an apples and oranges comparison because we have not seen in a couple of years Darius Garland as the primary engine of an offense. Now you can make the argument, I'll hear it out, that Darius Garland is the primary engine of this offense right now, that he is having, some of the advanced numbers would suggest that he's having a more profound impact on the Cavs offense this year than even Donovan Mitchell. But it remains the case. We talked about this on the All-Star pod a couple of days ago, that Donovan Mitchell is still the top of the scouting report. He gets defensive attention and sees the caliber of defenders more often, the number one defenders more often than Darius Garland does. That's just the facts. But the things like one of the things that Kenny was asked about specifically tonight and mentioned as a comparison to Steph was Darius's, the way he sets these big guys up with these up and unders and these step through moves that he has, where he can get guys, and where he gets guys down on the block, he stops, he pivots, and he gets that step through. He can go under a contested defender. He gets them off their feet, stuff like that. It's the flash mixed with the fundamentals. That's what Steph is so amazing, because a basketball coach and someone who's watching a basketball for the first time can both watch Steph Curry on the same play and both say, wow, that's amazing. The guy who's never seen basketball in their life will watch Steph, shimmy around with the ball for a couple of dribbles and shoot a 35-footer and be like, wow, that's amazing. That is a transformative experience for me. I'm a basketball fan now. The coach will watch the same play and say, no, you don't even get it. Like, it's cool that he's making a 35-footer, but look at how he gets his entire body. It's crazy. No matter how off balance Steph looks, it's crazy how everything is still always pointed to the basket, shoulders, hips, wrist, whatever. Even after all the shimmying, all the contortions he uses with his body to get a defender off balance, it's amazing how he still ends up in the same spot when he's shooting his shot. That consistency is incredible. With Darius, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's some of the no-look passes that he makes, but it's the reads that it takes for him to see these plays ahead of time. It's some of the pretty finishes under the rim, but it's also how he sets them up, how he can even get some of these shots off. I think that's the comparison that Kenny is making. I'm not saying that Darius doesn't have another leap in his game, but I'm saying that it's hard to compare him. Like, if we're talking superstar, if we're talking face of the league, or even face of a franchise, we saw a peek at that during the play-in season before Donovan got here. We saw a peek at that, and we'll get a good test run on whether he's ready to be a co-engine, like a top-end co-engine in the playoffs this year. That's really fun. I'm really excited to look forward to that. But I don't know. Steph is rarefied air, man. He's an all-time great. He is the best player. Depending on how you feel the KD teams, I think that Steph was more indispensable to those teams than KD was. The best player on at least a couple of championship teams, plus the finals teams, and he's the face of a dynasty. I see where Kenny's coming from, but I'm not there yet.
Like you said, you led with this. Like, it took a couple of years before Steph Curry became Steph Curry, right? This is Darius Garland's sixth season. When did Stephen Curry win his first championship? His sixth season. So, like, the trajectory for me was more what I, delved into in my article, because, you can see the comparisons. You can see how their injury, history, all these other things that go into it, and then impact. And obviously, there's no impact like Stephen Curry because of all these different metrics and what he was able to do on and off numbers. And these are, the bigger things. But Kenny Atkinson being able to say, we can give Darius Garland the ball when we don't know what else is going on, and we have the utmost faith that he will find a way to make something happen. That is, the trust factor that is kind of what Steph was able to do in his career. And obviously, we also, I do have these numbers pulled up. 125.2 is the Cavs offensive rating with Darius Garland on the floor after tonight's game. that would be the highest offensive rating for a player in the last 10 years. And we talked about this on the other podcast, but like these numbers like can get misconstrued. These numbers are very finicky, but like when you talk about a guy who is coming into his own, who's coming off one of the worst years of his life, like this is the kind of step that you would want to see a guy make and say that this is not only this is not your ceiling. This should be what your standard is going forward for the rest of your career. And then if that's the case, and depending on how the Cavs fare in playoffs and all those different things, then we can begin to have those conversations. But I think the comparisons that Kenny's making are too close not to be able to have these different conversations. I have two more questions for you, Jimmy, before we get out of here. Okay. First, since we're on the take island, let's do it. Georges Niang has had good games this year. He's had poor games this year. He's had games that have caused for Kenny Atkinson to say he was the best defender on the floor. And there's been obviously fans around the league that have said that he's been the worst defender on the floor. And we know our friend Chris Fedor has gotten the brunt of the of all of that from George in the locker room and all good fun. But
if you guys could see, you guys should have seen George and Chris in the locker room. George was in the best mood. I'll say this. George was in about as good a mood as I've ever seen him after game 1 against the Magic last year when he had a good game. And he was pretty excited about the Sixers who had let him go the year before, who had let him enter free agency the year before, losing game 1 to the Knicks. He was in a great mood then. I'd say tonight tops that easily. George was very happy after this win against the Pistons, and he was poking a lot of fun at Chris.
And it was a lot of fun to see because it's just back and forth. It's just banter. And obviously, Chris spends as much time with these guys during the season as he does his family, possibly more, or more than likely more. But, like, the other thing being, like, George got 5 fouls in 3 quarters tonight and had to be on the bench. And that called on Jaylon Tyson, who we got to see go up against Cade Cunningham and be his matchup when Max Strus was on the bench with Dean Wade out, Karis LeVert, all these guys that we've mentioned. And Jaylon held his own, right? And I don't have the exact matchup data in front of me, but I know that there was a particular play that Kenny Atkinson pointed out after the game where he came out and walled up against Cade Cunningham and forced a hard shot, and he missed it. Jimmy, are you at the point where you would rather have Jaylon Tyson split the minutes that Georges Niang would usually get to see where his development would be, especially when we're talking about where we're at in the season, how the Cavs have, especially after the Boston Celtics lost tonight, continued to build up this banked wins and this banked gap between them and the second seed?
That's an interesting question. Let me start. Just put a bow on the Darius thing real quick. I think offensive defensive ratings are better as team stats than individual stats. It's still notable that Darius is, like, however you sort it, Darius often ends up, the numbers end up spelling out Darius as the reason the Cavs are a great offensive team this year. Just saying. Also, to the Steph point, I know it sounds ridiculous. We're not saying that he's Steph, but no one saw Steph coming either. Okay, that's another valid thing to say, is that if you had told someone who was watching Steph Curry in, I don't know, 2013, that he was going to be a 2-time MVP, 1-time unanimous, both in LeBron James's prime, and become one of the 10 greatest players of all time, 10 to 15, wherever you want to put him, they would have looked at you a little funny. That's it. To our Georges Niang, Jaylon Tyson conversation. I think, again, I see it 2 ways. For Jaylon Tyson's development and potentially for putting together another, like, break glass in case of emergency defensive option in the playoffs, yeah, I think we'd like to see Jaylon Tyson get more money. By the way, we're going to, because Isaac Okoro and Dean Wade continue to be out. Karis LeVert seems closer than the other 2 guys, the way Kenny was talking. But Dean Wade, he said, is more than day-to-day. Isaac has missed 6 games now, right? Something like that. So we're going to get these looks. But the thing is, George has been George has been even better offensively this year than he has last year. If he keeps shooting like this, it's hard to keep him off the court, particularly given his size. Get a stretch big next to one of Jared Allen or Evan Mobley when they're not sharing the court together. That is invaluable. That being said, there's a reason that Kenny Atkinson and before him JB Bickerstaff would go out of their way to point out George's defensive successes when they happen. You'd see this a lot. How much has Kenny been talking up Darius Garland's defensive aptitude that Chris has disagreed with at times on this podcast? Coaches are trying to reward the behavior that they are seeking from their players. So Georges Niang makes a bunch of threes, cool. That's what he's on the team to do. Georges Niang holds his own defensively on switches. We're going to go on a 3-minute soliloquy on it in a press conference. We're going to call him the best defensive player on the court. I don't care if Georges Niang held Cade Cunningham to 0 for 11 on switches tonight. That's just me cherry picking a random example. He's not the best defensive player on the court at any time. He's not. Evan Mobley and Jared Allen are on the team. He's not. Dean Wade, Isaac Okoro are on the team. Not healthy right now, but on the team. That's never the case. The coaches are saying this because they know that's an area where these players need to improve and potentially even feel insecure about. Georges Niang, every time someone brings up to him that a coach said something nice about his defense, he says something effective. Oh, they said that? That's great. I take a lot of pride on that end. Come on. Okay? So Georges Niang is probably never going to be your answer on defense. Jaylon Tyson might be. As we get into, I see a scenario, George is playing well right now. So right now, no. Because I think you really need him. If you can get this version of him in the playoffs, that is a very useful player to you. And you don't want to mess with his head. As we talked about last year in the playoffs, and George has talked about it since, how it felt to feel like every shot that he took during the playoffs could result in his benching if it didn't go in. You don't want to ever go down that road again with him if you can afford it. Now, if organically Georges Niang happens to go on a shooting slump in the middle of the season and the risk of Georges Niang on the court at one end tends to outweigh the benefit that he provides at another, that's a natural opportunity to give Jaylon Tyson a little more burn. This is think big picture, not just as far as this season. I don't know that either of these guys are going to swing a title for the Cavs, but Georges Niang is a more important player to the Cavs championship aspirations in 2024-25 than Jaylon Tyson. I'm very confident of that. Next year, I'm less confident, and I get less confident each year thereafter. So how big do you want to think about this, Kenny Atkinson? You have a chance to win a title this year, and you want to maximize that. But Jaylon Tyson, particularly under the new cap environment, I keep talking about the Nuggets when we talk about this stuff. Look at Kentavious Caldwell-Pope out the door. Bruce Brown out the door. They're trying to replace these guys with young dudes. Peyton Watson, Christian Brown. There are growing pains associated with trying to assume those roles, in part because those guys didn't get, Peyton Watson in particular, a ton of opportunities to fill them before. So if you can sort of toe the line and say, okay, Jaylon Tyson, make your rookie mistakes, particularly as you adjust to being a role player in the NBA, learn this life, learn how to maximize your limited opportunities as a shooter and scorer, be a defensive plus, get all these reps against a guy like Cade. Like tonight is great for Jaylon Tyson to get the opportunity to guard Cade and that experience, because that's the kind of guy they're going to want him to guard in the future. I see a ton of value in that big picture, because Jaylon Tyson that's the last first round pick that the Cavs control for quite some time. He is a very important piece of the future puzzle here. So you should, if you can afford it, you should try to find ways to weasel more minutes for him, I think.
And just because I mentioned the matchup data, and I did have time to pull it up, of players that Jaylon Tyson has guarded for more than 3 field goal attempts this season, and I know there's different time periods. Obviously, there's one for Brandon Boston.
There's probably not a lot of those. I would guess there's not a lot of those.
There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's five on this list. one of these players has made more than one field goal. Like, that is how good Jaylon Tyson has been defensively for this team. And obviously, Jaylon Tyson is not somebody that came in and was quiet about what he wanted to accomplish in his first season with the Cleveland Cavaliers, talking about coming in and wanting to be an all defensive team, talking about wanting to make the rotation, and having his head coach from college call Kenny Atkinson and tell him that he was going to crack the rotation. Like, that is just the utmost confidence when you come into the NBA as the 20th overall selection on a team that just went to the Eastern Conference semifinals, right? So he's held Brandon Boston, 1 of 6, Bogdan Bogdanovic, 1 of 4, Johnny Davis, 1 of 3, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, 1 of 3. The one player that has taken the most shots against him and converted the most is Antonio Reeves, who is 4 of 6 from the floor against him in 3.5 minutes played, right? So the others are like 50% or whatever, because you're only getting into like 2 attempts, which is unfair to him because of the lack amount of time that he's on the floor. But regardless, I want to move away from Jaylon Tyson. I want to move to our last topic.
None of these guys, by the way, these are a lot of barely rotation, if that, NBA players, which makes sense. That's when Jaylon Tyson's playing. But like, it's just here's the thing: Georges Niang, known commodity on defense. I don't care what Kenny says. Teams are going to attack him. Jaylon Tyson, kind of a lump of clay. We can still learn some stuff about him on the defensive end.
100%. And I want to move on to our last topic because we're already getting up there in time, Jimmy. And the last portion is obviously the interior of this game against the Detroit Pistons, because, yes, this podcast is reacting to the game against the Detroit Pistons, even though we've covered so many different topics. Jimmy, Evan Mobley came back the other night, and this is only his second game back after missing like a week and a half with his calf strain. He looked gassed the last night that he played. He looked a lot better tonight, but he mentioned that he's still not to where he wants to be. Kenny Atkinson still said that after the game that he felt like he still got a ways to go, a ways away from where they want him to be, from where he was at the beginning of the season. But still, him and Jarrett Allen together on the court are a completely different dynamic than when Jarrett Allen was dealing with guys like Alperen Şengün without him. And obviously tonight as well, having to deal with Jalen Duren and all those guys over there. Isaiah Stewart, again, being another name to throw out there. But Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen combined for 26 points and 25 rebounds tonight. 8 on the offensive end. And I think you understand that if this, and more so talking about Evan Mobley, because obviously this was a bounce back game for Jarrett Allen coming back. Kenny Atkinson said that he was playing with more energy than he had been in the past. Sometimes that has to deal with just the one day off that we talked about on this podcast already, being very influential, especially to the emotional and physical toll that is on these players through an 82-game season. But Evan Mobley, like, for the floor, for him to come back, not feel like himself, and still have 2 steals and 2 blocks and being a plus minus of plus 12, like, while contributing on the rebounding, all these different things. What does that say about where Evan Mobley can end up in his career and this season, but also how important he is on the offensive end to be to have this team play to its highest clip? Because we understand that this was the first game of the Cavs season that they won when shooting below 30% from the floor, and they also held a team to below 100 points in a game for just the 5th time this season.
Again, I will say I think the Pistons played a role in that, but the Cavs looked very engaged in defense. Obviously, having Evan Mobley out there makes it a completely different equation. I think it was Ty Jerome after the game was also giving Evan like a little bit of, oh, you're back. You looked back tonight. You looked like back to your old self, and Evan was still pushing back on it. I think Evan has looked a little bit more like the 2023-24 version of himself, his first, as he gets his sea legs back into it. The defense is there. That's all. I mean, Evan Mobley has had these instincts since the second he's stepped foot in the NBA. He's been a great defender. but like particularly against Houston and early tonight, I thought he looked a little bit more timid around the rim. Wasn't playing with as much force as he had grown to play with once he got comfortable during this season. And then there was a play maybe later in the first half where he like took a couple of bumps, had a couple of pivots, had to like play through some contact and then dropped one in. I was like, oh, I recognize that. So that's like, I think we're still seeing it in bits and pieces right now. I think that Evan and Kenny are both pretty accurate in their assessment there, that he's still climbing back to all-star level Evan Mobley that we were seeing before he got hurt with the calf strain. But it's the idea that you're working yourself back and you're just getting an all defense 11 player, that's pretty nice, man. By the way, an all defense player, I looked this up last year. I'm not going to remember it, but basically, like, even the production that Evan Mobley was giving the Cavs last year, which was 17 and 11 or something thereabouts, was, when you factor in his stature as a defender, is like all-time great for that stature of defender. You look at like defensive player of the year type guys. You think of like Rudy Gobert, Ben Wallace, the only guy who's ever won 4 defensive player of the year awards. They're defense only guys. They're specialists. They're incredible. And they're high minutes earners, and they're incredibly valuable to a team. But like Evan Mobley, I don't think people really understood this. For a guy who's as good at defense as he was already in like the, I don't know, 85th percentile of offensive skill for those guys. Now he's taking it to another level. Again, still working his way back up to the calf strain, but like the glimpses that he was showing earlier this year. The other thing, he still looks, the 3-point jumper doesn't look as comfortable anymore, right? Like he's not shooting those with as much confidence. They're not going in as much since he's been back the last couple games. But like that's part of being gone. I asked Kenny about it because he only missed 4 games, right? Like how much do you really need to reset? Just like rhythm's a delicate thing. And Kenny brought up the idea of rhythm being perhaps even more delicate for a big man because they don't have the ball as much. They don't get to, like, rhythm is kind of one of these words that can mean a lot of things. You can gain rhythm just by dribbling up the court, by doing a couple behind the back. If you're a point guard, like a couple behind the backs between the legs, crossover, like that stuff, well, it just gives you feel for the ball, makes you feel like you're involved. Big men go 2-3 possessions without touching the ball sometimes. And so when you're missing games and then you're kind of in this like wait for my turn kind of situation, that's even harder. So the patience with Evan, it'll come. But to your point, Ethan, even his baseline is pretty freaking high offensively for a player of his defensive stature.
And I think it's important to mention, like, I'm not going to say that this, I am going to say it. I think the team's offensive ceiling rides on Evan Mobley. And that is a lot to put on the shoulders of somebody who's still like so young into his career. But the reality is that the Cavs they didn't play great offensively tonight. They played decently offensively against Houston, but Evan Mobley still wasn't himself in that game. You talk about a guy that is able to come in, like get to the paint, use his footwork, but also then stretch the floor, hit threes, and be an offensive hub because he has grown his passing acumen as well. That is what has taken this Cavs team to the next level. And Kenny Atkinson will be the first to tell you. It's Darius, Garland, Donovan Mitchell playing at an all-star level, and then Evan Mobley like raising his game to a level that we haven't seen before. And for him to be able to do that, it's going to take a couple more games, as he's mentioned, and he's almost there. But like when we were at practice today or shoot around today, like you saw Evan on the side court getting in his footwork work and just like being at the cup of the rim, like being like, for him, it felt like at his reach, but working on floaters, working on touch, working on things that you wouldn't necessarily think you would need to do at 7 feet tall. But after you miss 4 games, as we mentioned, Jimmy, like these are the small things that can impact how he feels in his game. And obviously, if he's the one telling us that he's not there yet, that like, and when he gets back to that, you'll see it, you'll understand it, you'll feel it for the Cavs offense. And I think as much as they want and they need the defensive identity to come back and them to lean on that, especially it's even more prominent as Evan Mobley isn't being himself on the offensive end. And they'll have to, and I might write about this for tomorrow, how Evan can raise the bar for them, but his floor, and as Donovan Mitchell says all the time, this is the worst that he's going to be. And he's already an all-star. But
Evan Mobley is going to be the reason the Cavs win a championship if they win a championship. I've said this. I've been saying this on the podcast since I've been coming on the podcast. Basketball is for tall people. The history of Finals MVPs since like 2000 that are shorter than 6'6", it's like Tony Parker, Dwayne Wade, and Steph. End of list. Everyone else is either a big wing or a center, essentially. The Cavs have 2 really good small guards, but I'm telling you, it may seem overly simplistic. Basketball for years has been telling us that small guards don't win championships unless you're a outlier of the outliers. And I think that you can see the Cavs have taken a leap for a lot of reasons under Kenny, the 3-point shooting, the movement, all that stuff. Evan Mobley was the biggest difference in the start of this season. And now we're just waiting for him to get back to that.
With that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. If you heard a topic that me and Jimmy discussed today that you feel like you want to go back and forth with us on, this is where you can go and join the Cavs community and have a conversation directly, not only to your phones, but to ours as well. And we can get back to you daily this way. So to get information, insight, and different things throughout each day, sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who signed up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.